day that the Lord has made, and I'm just so glad that a few of God's children have gathered in his house on another Lord's Sunday morning to give our God some praise. Y'all are mighty quiet in here. I said that this is the day that the Lord has made, and I'm just glad that some of God's children have gathered in his house one more time to give our God some praise. See, I don't presume that you woke yourself up this morning. I don't presume that you put food on your own table this morning. I don't think that you put clothes on your own back or you put a little beat in your own heart. So you ought to stand up on your feet this morning and give our God some praise. If you can say without a shadow of a doubt that if it had not been for the Lord who was on my side, who was keeping me, who was blessing me, who was sustaining me all week long, I do not know where I'd be. There ought to be some worshipers in the house of God this morning. I don't know about you, but I feel mighty good this morning just because I'm alive to see another day, and everything may not be what I would like it to be, but I know it's not what it could be. And for that, I give God all of the praise, all of the honor, and all of the glory. Certainly, this is a wonderful day, and we have come to kiss our God both in spirit and in truth. What's up, 3rd Street? It's good to see you all. You all look so wonderful out there this morning. It was a long trip here all the way from 9th Street. It was a long trip all the way over here, but I'm so thankful to stand before you here, and you all were so kind to invite an undignified Baptist to stand in your pulpit this morning. I am so thankful and so grateful for that. I love the Church of God. One of my best friends in ministry has baptized me in Church of God doctrine. So if I was not Baptist, I probably would be Church of God. Let me just tell you that. To your esteemed and wonderful pastor, who indeed is a wonderful co-laborer, a great mentor, a great friend in the gospel ministry, I honor her. I just want to say that I am blessed to know the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Sanders. Not only am I blessed to know her, but I consider it an honor and a privilege to have been born in the same span of time as one of the greatest ethicists, one of the greatest theological minds that our nation has ever known. And certainly we salute her. She indeed is a scholar par excellence. And it is so wonderful to work with and on beside her. I see some other friends who are here with me this morning. I see some friends from Shiloh. The vice chair of our trustee board, along with one of our ministers, is here this morning. I see one of my colleagues from the Divinity School who so graciously and wonderfully works as the assistant dean. And I'm so grateful for all of them and all of the friends who have come. I dare not name too many names because I'll get in trouble. But I will stop right there. And to my dear sister, Reverend Keisha Patrick, thanking her and her leadership over this ministry here at 3rd Street. It's good to be here. I think I've said hello to everybody in Lottie Dottie. So I think that there is a word from the Lord this morning that we might share. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, won't you stand on your feet if you are able. If you go to the book of Ruth, the 1st chapter I want to read from, beginning at the 1st verse. Ruth, the 1st chapter, beginning at the 1st verse. If you have it, just say, I have it. If you need some more time, just say, hold on, preacher. Ruth, the 1st chapter, and the 1st verse. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They were the Ephrathites, from Bethlehem of Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. After they had lived there about 2 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons, without her 2 sons and her husband. When she had heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on a road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought that there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone against me." At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law and goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and to her gods. Won't you go back with her?" But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." This is the word of God for the people of God, and our response this morning is simply, thanks be to our God. This morning, as you take your seats, I just want to talk about an unpopular decision. An unpopular decision. Can you just act Baptist for me just for a little bit and just turn to your neighbor this morning and say, "Neighbor, the preacher's going to talk about an unpopular decision." Just turn to your other neighbor and just say, "Neighbor, oh neighbor, the preacher's going to talk about an unpopular decision." Eternal God, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for life. We thank you for health. We thank you for strength. Oh Lord, we've heard from Fox. We've heard from MSNBC. We've heard from CNN. We've heard from the Washington Post. We've heard from the Baltimore Sun. But now, oh God, we stand in need to hear from you. So, oh God, we ask that you would send a word from on high, that it might prick our hearts for the living of our days. May now the words that come from my mouth and the meditations that flow from my heart be acceptable in your sight. For you are my preaching partner and my soon coming King. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Beloved, I want to talk about an unpopular decision. The year was 2005, and an announcement was made that changed the music industry forever. You see, there was one particular group that had climbed to the top of the music charts, and they had taken the world by storm. They had gained the respect of both the young and gained the respect of the old. They were Grammy Award-winning artists. They had performed on international stages, and they had redefined what it meant to be both singers and performers. Beloved, it was June 11th to be exact. June 11th, and the year was 2005, when a decision was made by a group of women that shocked and made the world go into a frenzy. Their whole decision sent the world aflame, and everybody was asking, why is this group breaking up? I realize that there may be some people in the room who are either too old, a little bit older than me, or too young to remember the year 2005 when all of the newspapers around the world were talking about this group that we had grown to love was breaking up. The name of that group, y'all remember them, was a group by the name of Destiny's Child. Oh, come on, y'all ain't been saved all your life. The group name was Destiny's Child. Y'all remember there was Beyonce, Giselle Knowles, of course, but Beyonce used to sing with two other girls back in the day. One's name was Kelly Rowland and the other Michelle Williams. But they shocked the world on June 11, 2005, when they made an announcement in Barcelona, Spain, that they would no longer be performing together as a group. They would now be going their separate way to explore their own solo careers. It was, I believe, one of the media, one of the press reporters began interviewing the three of them, and they were in a series of interviews. When Beyonce was interviewed, they kept asking her, why are y'all breaking up? You see, we have not seen the likes of this type of group since Diana Ross and the Supremes. We have not seen the likes of this type of group since Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. Y'all have climbed to the highest of the music industry's charts, and now y'all just gonna throw it all away? The reporters that day, they couldn't wrap their minds around why Beyonce and why Kelly and why Michelle were going to now explore their own solo careers. Everybody was afraid of what was next. But in one of those interviews, Beyonce says to the reporter, she says, we've prayed about it. And then she goes on to say, after we prayed about it, I believe that this was the best decision for me. And I don't know who I'm talking to this morning, but I just stopped by 3rd Street to tell you that there will come moments in your life where I hope you have the strength and I hope you have the fortitude to look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I've prayed about this, and this is the best decision for me. I pray, beloved, that when the rubber hits the road and when you come to having to face a certain challenge or a situation and you've got 2 or 3 options before you, I pray that sometimes you will have the strength and the fortitude to look your own self in the mirror and say, you know what, I prayed about it, but this is the best decision for me. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should leave here today and become some self-centered or some self-absorbed egomaniac like the one that lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I'm not suggesting that you should forget about your family or forget about your loved ones, but I've lived long enough now to know that there are some decisions you just have to make for yourself. Won't you just turn to your neighbor one more time and say, neighbor, you just got to do you, baby, sometimes. You just got to do you. Sometimes there will be moments in your life when there are some decisions you will just have to make for yourself. I'm not suggesting that you become self-centered. I'm not suggesting that you become self-absorbed. But I know that there will be moments that you will have to make some decisions for you and you alone. In our text, we are met by a family in crisis. The story begins with a man by the name of Elimelech. And Elimelech has married a woman by the name of Naomi. Elimelech and Naomi, they are the parents of 2 sons. These boys grow up to be strong, successful men, and they marry 2 Moabite women. But what is interesting about their story, that they were what you would call a nuclear family. That's a sociological word. They were a nuclear family. They had done everything right. They were the This Is Us. They were the Huxtables, if you will. This wasn't no Greenleaf type of family. This was the Huxtables. And this was a wonderful family just trying to make it and live on their own. They had done everything right. They had raised their sons, and their sons grew up to marry 2 Moabite women. And then one day, Elimelech dies, leaving 2 children and 2 daughter-in-laws and a wife behind. One day, not shortly after that, the 2 sons die. And then we are left with just the 2 daughters, Ruth and Orpah, and their beloved mother-in-law, Naomi. This, in many ways, was a devastating crisis. Together, they had begun living wonderful lives, and only for Elimelech to die and they be left without a patriarch. Only now for the husbands to die and they be left without defenders and providers. And while death is always an inconvenient reality, I will say that this series of death was an abrupt inconvenience. Death is always an inconvenient reality that we must always face, but this particular series of death was indeed an abrupt inconvenience. It was devastating for these three women. It was hard for them to wrap their minds around what they would do next and where they would go. They were left without husband and father. And I dare not try to teach too much Bible this morning in front of this Harvard-trained theologian, but I want to teach just a little bit of Bible this morning. You see, this was a problem for both Orpah and Ruth and their mother-in-law Naomi because of the context in which they lived. You see, Elimelech and his sons had raised their families in what we would call a patriarchal society. If you've never seen a patriarchal society, just look around. It's all around you. We still, for some reasons, live in a patriarchal society. Brothers, that was for you. That was for you. Talk back to me, brothers. That was for you. These three women live in a patriarchal society. And in the society that these three women lived in, a woman's worth was defined by two things. One, the man she married, and two, the children that she bore with him. A woman's worth was wrapped up in these two realities, the man she married and the children that she bore with him. So here are these two daughter-in-laws. Here they are. They have no children and they have no husband to make children with. Naomi is looking at her two daughter-in-laws. She is looking at them and they are sad. They are weeping because not only have they lost their husbands, but they have lost their worth in this type of society. This in many ways was a curveball for them. This was an unexpected midnight nightmare. This was nothing that they had planned. This was a curveball for these two women. Here they were, young women, thinking that they were going to grow old and have children and sit beside the fire maybe one day even with their grandchildren. They thought that their husbands would always be there. They probably even thought that they would grow old with their husbands and their husbands would one day bury them. But now these two women, Ruth and Orpah, they have buried their husbands and now they have to face a society that no longer values them because they have no child and they have no husband to make a child with. I'm preaching better than y'all responding in here, but I'll keep going anyhow. This was a curveball. This was an unexpected event. And I've lived long enough now to know that you ought to be ready for some curveballs in life. The reality is that we don't know what lies for us by noon today. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't know what's next. And that's why you ought to always walk into the house of God on Sunday morning thankful for the way things are right now. Thankful for the air that's flowing through your lungs right now because we don't know what's around the corner. We don't know what curveballs come our way. The only reality that we have to live with is the fact that there may be some curveballs. Oh, somebody is not ashamed this morning to say, I've had some curveballs. I've had some good days, but I've had some bad days too. I've had some wonderful days, but I've also had some sleepless nights. I've been up on the mountaintop, but I've always known what it is to walk through the valley in the shadow of death. Can I get any help in here this morning? Do you know that life will sometimes throw some curveballs at you? And that's what's happening in the text this morning. Ruth and her sister Orpah, they have had to bury their husbands prematurely. But the text goes on to say that Ruth makes one decision and her sister-in-law Orpah makes another. Now all of you who have read this story or have at least heard about this story know that when we talk about this story, we always privilege Ruth. We always talk about what Ruth did. Ruth did what we have come to know as the noble thing to do. Ruth, she did the noble thing. She decided to stay with her mother-in-law. Naomi is looking at her two daughters-in-law, and she said, listen, y'all, I'm just going to go back home, and y'all go back home too. I'm going to get me an Airbnb. I'm going to stay there for a few days, and then I'll find some place to live. Just send me a Facebook message every now and then to let me know that you're all right. But y'all go on back home. I'm going to go my way. I'm not going to make y'all come with me. Y'all go back home and find a new husband. Y'all go back home. That's what Naomi is saying to her two daughter-in-laws. Here she's looking in the eyes of two black women, and she knows that their worth in the society is no longer valued because they have no husband or child. And we've always privileged Ruth's response. We've always privileged Ruth, though, because when we read this scripture in the manner that it has been preached to us, we're told that Ruth did the right thing. But I want to trouble biblical waters this morning. And I want to give some voice to Orpah. Because in this moment, Orpah makes what I have called this morning an unpopular decision. Orpah says, I hear you, Ruth. You're going to go back with Ma. You're going to go live with her. You're going to go take care of her. And Orpah says, you know what? I have prayed about this. She has a Beyonce moment. She says, I've prayed about this, but I've got to do what's best for me. Orpah decides, I don't think I can go. I think that I've got to do what's best for me. That's what I'm trying to get across to you this morning. If you don't hear anything else in this message on this millennial and this young adult Sunday, I just come by to tell you that there are going to be some curveballs that are going to come your way, and you have to make the decision sometimes what's best for you. There will become some moments when you have to look at the mirror and you have to look at yourself and you say, you know what, I've got to do this because this is what's best for me. Orpah makes an unpopular decision. She makes a decision that we rarely talk about. She makes a decision that we rarely focus on. She does what is unpopular. Orpah says, you know what, I've got to go back home. I think I'm going to go back to my own people. I think I'm going to go back to Moab. I think I'm going to try to do this thing over. I'm going to try to make it on my own. Orpah, in this moment, she makes an unpopular decision. And I just believe that there may be somebody sitting amongst us this morning who has 2 or 3 options in front of them. And they are wondering what option they should make. And sometimes your decision and sometimes the decision you have to make will be an unpopular one, but a necessary one nonetheless. Orpah, here she is with her sister-in-law Ruth, and they are with their mother-in-law Naomi. And the text says, in 2 different times in the text, when you read the story, it says that they were weeping. Now, if the writer uses the word they, we can suppose that all 3 of them were weeping together. I'm going somewhere with this. I promise you I am. The text says they were weeping. In the moment that Orpah decides that she's going to go back to her homeland, she is still found weeping. She is making this decision not to go back to Judah with her mother-in-law, not to go back to Judah with her sister-in-law. She is making the decision, I'm going back to my homeland, but she goes weeping nonetheless. And I don't know who I'm talking to this morning, but I just want to free you up and let you know that sometimes you can be faced with a decision, and sometimes just because you have to decide to part from a situation, just because you have to leave a relationship, just because you have to leave a job, just because you have to go in another direction, does not mean that you don't care. Sometimes we can just get caught up in wondering about what people are going to think. Are they going to think that I don't care? Are they going to think that I don't want to be for them? Are they going to think that I'm just self-absorbed and I'm just egotistical and I'm just self-centered? Just because they left does not necessarily mean that they don't care. Just because they stepped down from the position, just because they said I need a sabbatical, just because they said I need some rest, just because, let me free somebody up in here, just because they said, you know what, I don't think this relationship is for me anymore, does not mean that they don't necessarily care about you. That's a hard reality sometimes. We think that because people leave, they don't care. But the reality is that sometimes people have to do what is simply best for them. You got to look at your own destiny sometimes, and a part of maturity is being able to look at things and say, you know what, this ain't a part of my destiny. You know what, this ain't a part of my destiny. It's nice, I do it well, I do a good job, I like it here, this is comfortable, but this just ain't a part of my destiny. That's something that we will all have to admit to ourselves every now and then, that some things are just not for you, and you will ultimately have to make an unpopular decision. Orpah, she is here with her sister-in-law. She is here with her mother-in-law, who she has grown to love. And she makes this unpopular decision. Not only does she make the decision, but she does it while weeping. But as I read this text, when I read through all of the translations as we are taught to do, one of the translations says that they were on their way to Judah when this conversation broke up. Orpah, Ruth, and Naomi were on their way to Judah when this conversation broke out. That makes me believe that at some point, Orpah was actually going to go back with her mother-in-law. At one point, she was actually okay. At one point, she was okay with the reality of, you know what, I'm just going to just give up on this idea of having children and a family. You know what, I'm going to go back with my mother-in-law. The text says, though, that they were on their way back to Judah when this conversation broke out. And I just stopped by to tell somebody this morning that it's okay to have second thoughts. Can I be real this morning? Can I be real with you this morning? Sometimes there will be some decisions that you make, and it's okay to go back on some decisions that you've made. It's okay to be invested in something and then find yourself no longer invested. That's what they call human. That's what they call human. It is a human reality that sometimes we will have second thoughts. As I was preparing to preach to you this morning, I began to think about where it was I was coming. And I thought, you know, I've got to go to 3rd Street. And I thought about where 3rd Street is and what neighborhood 3rd Street is. And whenever I come to this side of town, I always pass by Dunbar High School. Anybody know where Dunbar High School is? It's just up the street. I have to pass by Dunbar to get to 3rd Street. And I began thinking about my fond memories at Dunbar. You see, I was a political science and history double major in undergrad with a secondary education minor. It was my plan to become a social studies teacher. I wanted to teach 11th grade government and civics. I wanted to teach history. I wanted to teach about the Civil War. I wanted black children to know the story of their people. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a social studies teacher. And I remember that when I was a student at Howard, it was my senior year. And those of you who have gone to Howard, you know that in the College of Arts and Sciences at Howard, there is this thing called a swimming requirement. Somebody just say, Lord, have mercy. It's called a swimming requirement. So I was preparing to go into my senior year and take all of my courses and take swimming and graduate from Howard and become a social studies teacher. But when I got to senior year, this thing called ministry, I still haven't figured it out yet. But God began speaking to me about this thing called ministry. And I said, no, God, I've done all this coursework. I got 2 degrees in political science and history. I'm going to be a social studies teacher. I may even become a principal one day. And Lord, if you want me to lead, I'll become a superintendent. But I'm never going to become a preacher. That's what I told God. That's what I told God. One of my friends, Courtney Robinson, is here this morning. None of my friends, if you ask them at Howard, was Kevin a preacher? They'll say, no, not in a million years. I was at every party, every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. I was there. It was never in my plan to become a preacher. But it was my senior year, and there was this thing called a swimming requirement. And I remember walking into Dr. Bonner's office, and I said, Dr. Bonner, I'm prepared to sign up for student teaching at Dunbar High School. She said to me, okay, all right, that sounds good. You want to go work at Dunbar. It was the old Dunbar then. That's fine. You want to work at Dunbar. She said, but have you finished all of your requirements? I said, no, I haven't. I just have one. I just have swimming. And I'm going to take the 6 a.m. swim class. Lord help me. I'm going to take the 6 a.m. swim class. I can't swim, but I'm going to take the 6 a.m. swim class, and then I will go to my student teaching assignment around 8:30. I had it all planned out. And she said, well, Mr. Peterman, I'm sorry to tell you that the rules have changed, and you have to complete all of your requirements before you can do your student teaching. She said, you're going to have to take some extra classes this semester and then maybe come back next semester and do your student teacher next year. I said, no, ma'am, I'm graduating on May 11th. No, ma'am, I got to graduate. And she said, well, you're not going to be able to complete your certification to become a teacher. And the whole time I heard God saying in my ear, I've been telling you. I've been trying to get your attention. I've been telling you that you got to change your mind. I heard God the whole way back to my dorm room just saying, I've been trying to get your attention. And there I was in my senior year of college, having prepared to become a social studies teacher, having prepared to become an educator, and all of a sudden I had to give up on my plans. All of a sudden I was on my way to Judah, but I had to turn back because God wanted me to go to Moab. Y'all just missed it. Sometimes in your life, you will have to have second thoughts. Second thoughts are holy. Second thoughts can sometimes be revelation from God. Second thoughts can sometimes be God just simply directing you in the right way. Let me say that so many people miss out on new opportunities. So many people miss out on what God has for them. So many people miss out on love even. So many people miss out on the things that God has for them because they're afraid to go back on their decision. Second thoughts are holy. Second thoughts are revelation from God. And here we see Orpah on her way to Judah. She's going to Judah with her mother-in-law. She's on her way to Judah with her sister-in-law. And then she says, you know what? I've thought about this thing, but I have to make an unpopular decision, Ruth. I can't go with you. I've got to go back home to Moab. You must know something about this. It's easy. It's right here in the text, but I think I might as well preach it since it's here. Orpah and Ruth were related. Did you know that? Did you know Orpah and Ruth were related? They were sister-in-laws. They had married two brothers. They were related. Here, Orpah, Ruth was not just some coworker. Ruth was not just some friend that she had met along the way. Ruth literally had become family to her. Not only was Naomi her mother-in-law, but Naomi was family to her. Orpah, this is not just some mother-in-law that she don't like. Y'all got a few of them. This is not some mother-in-law that she doesn't like. She's weeping over her. She's weeping over the fact that she might have to leave her. She's saying, no, I don't know if I should leave you. This was family. In this moment, Orpah even leaves her family. And I dare say to somebody this morning that sometimes you'll have to make decisions that even your family doesn't agree with. Even the people who are close to you, the people who say they love you, the people who you love, sometimes you'll have to make some unpopular decisions that even your family will not be comfortable about. That is the reality that we live in. Orpah is trying to decide what she's going to do. But she also has to think about, these people have taken care of me. These people have walked with me. This is my family. This was not an easy decision, but she had to make it nonetheless. This was not something that was simply done, but she had to make this decision. The text says that Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. Then it goes on to say that Ruth clung to her. And you have to be understanding of the fact that everybody's response will be different. These are two sister-in-laws. Yet Orpah decides to make a decision that even her sister-in-law is not comfortable making. And I just bring that up to you because sometimes in the world that we live in, young adults, in this Instagram culture, in this Facebook world, in this Snapchat world where people live for likes on Instagram and people live for comments under their page on Facebook, you will have to make some decisions about your own life without the distractions of other people. We can become so caught up in what everybody else is doing that begins to sway how we look at ourselves and the decisions that we need to make for our own lives. We can be so caught up in other people's successes and other people's well-doing and their flourishing that we forget that God has blessed us and has given us our own race to run. In this moment, they're on their way together, but Orpah says, you know what? I've thought about this. This may be good for Naomi, but it's not good for me. It's dangerous to live your life comparing yourself to the people around you. It's dangerous to always be looking at what other people are doing. That in this world, and social media is a wonderful tool, but it can be dangerous sometimes because we're constantly looking at what other people are doing in their lives, looking at what trips they went on, looking at, oh, they got grandchildren and I don't have any. Looking at, oh, their children love them so much and they're together. And I say this especially around the holidays. When we not only look at what other people have under their tree, but we look at other families coming together, wishing that that can be us. You got to run your own race. I told you that I graduated from Howard, and I did go on to seminary immediately after. But it was my first week there in New Jersey that it was so boring, Dr. Sanders, that I decided to get on a train and go see my best friend in New York City. We had both been political science majors, and we had both done very well, and we had both moved back to New York and New Jersey. He was from Texas and moved to Harlem, and I went to see my best friend. Now, here I was in seminary. Remember, I told you that was not my plan. I never desired to be there, but here I was in seminary. And I went to my friend's house, and he was telling me all about his new job. He was so excited that day. He was telling me all about his new job. I was even excited for him. And then I said, Wayne, how much they paying you? He told me the number, and I said, they paying you what? And here I was living on a student loan refund check. I said, and I remember going back to my pastor and saying, you know, the Lord has called me to ministry, but I don't know about this. You know, I could be here. My friends are at Goldman Sachs now, and my friends are in law school, and they're doing so well. And my pastor looked at me, and he said, Kevin, you will never make it in life if you don't learn to run your own race. I don't know who I'm talking to, but you got to have an Orpah spirit about you. You got to learn to run your own race, honey. You can't win a race looking at who's running beside you. Every runner knows that you got to lift those knees high. You got to run fast. But the one thing you must do is keep your eye forward on your own race. You'll never be able to win your own race. You'll get caught up. You may even trip and fall looking at what other people are doing. I don't know who I'm talking to this morning, but you've got to learn to run your own race. That is the story. I don't have much more to preach. I think I got to sit down. I'm headed to brunch after this, but Orpah decides to make an unpopular decision. And she makes a decision that many of us have never highlighted. We often center this text on Ruth. And when we look at this story, we know what happens to Ruth. The children read the other part of the story earlier today. We know that Ruth decides to go back, and Ruth decides to be with her mother-in-law. And while she's there back in Judah with her mother-in-law, she meets this man named Boaz. They fall in love. She even shows up at his house unexpected one night. Read it. It's in the text. She shows up at his house unexpected one night. They fall in love. They have a wonderful marriage. We know that Ruth and Boaz, they bear a child. That child's name is Obed. Obed had a child named Jesse. Jesse's child's name was David. And if you go down David's lineage, you'll find a man named Jesus. We know what happens to Ruth. We know that Ruth goes back to Judah with her mother-in-law. We see that a beautiful love story unfolds. We see what happens to Ruth. We know that Ruth lives a wonderful life, and she's there and finds this wonderful shining armor named Boaz. Boaz looks a little like Chaz Boseman and Denzel Washington. She's having this wonderful love affair with a man named Boaz. They have children, and their story is told throughout the rest of the Bible. We know what happens to Ruth. But when I read this story, I couldn't help but wondering, why do we not know what happens to Orpah? You know, I love a good soap opera. I'm my grandmama's child. I love a good soap opera. And I wanted to know what happens next in The Young and the Restless. What happens next with Orpah? I wanted to know, did Orpah ever find love? Did she ever meet anybody? Did Orpah have any children? Did she have an old flame that she got back with from a high school reunion? What happened to Orpah? I just am so mad at whoever wrote this Bible. I'm just upset because I wanted to know what happened to Orpah. And then I realized, Kevin, you don't know because it's probably none of your business. And beloved, when you come to that day when you have to make an unpopular decision, I want you to look in the mirror and say, I'm doing this for me, and it's nobody else's business. If they never hear from me again, it's my decision. I've got to do this for me. I'm doing this for me and God. This is what I have to do. It's not everybody's business sometimes to know what's going on in your life. And you've got to be comfortable with knowing that your story may never make the Times, may never make the Bible, may never even make the Washington Post. But she did what she had to do for her. And it's none of our business what happens next. Let me just close with this. Let me just say that many people are familiar with the story of Orpah and Ruth because they have heard about a woman by the name of Oprah Winfrey. You see, Oprah Winfrey was born to a teenage mother, and Oprah Winfrey's mother and her grandmother decided to name her after a biblical character in the Bible. But the story is that when Oprah's grandmother went to write on the birth certificate, she wrote the name wrong. She mixed up the letters, and instead of writing Orpah, she wrote Oprah. So we don't know what happened to Orpah, but we do know about a woman named Oprah. Now, why are you talking about Oprah on Sunday morning? Why are you talking about Oprah on Sunday morning? Oprah, too, had to make an unpopular decision. Those of you who know the story of Oprah Winfrey know that she started out as a small-town journalist. I believe it was even in Baltimore. It was in Chicago, Illinois. And Oprah was working in this newsroom, and then one day she said, I've had enough of this. This just ain't for me. I can't work here anymore. I got to do something. I got to do something different. And everybody around her said, Oprah, they paying you good money at that job. Don't you leave it. That job has been good for you. Oprah, you on TV now. Your grandmama was a maid, and now here you are with this big-time, big-city job. But Oprah said, I've got to make a decision that's for me and for me only. So Oprah leaves that job, and everybody looked at her and said, what's going to happen to Oprah? Well, let me tell you what happened to Oprah. Oprah went on. She had a beautiful career. Not only did she leave that job, but she got another one. She was on Phil Donahue one day. She was sitting in for Phil when they decided to give her her own talk show. So here she was working in the room, setting up, being the producer, being the background journalist, and now she's got her own job. Aren't y'all glad that Oprah decided to step out and do her own thing? Anybody glad that Oprah decided to go her own way and make an unpopular decision? If Oprah had never made that unpopular decision, there are children in Africa that would have never gotten an education. If Oprah had never made that unpopular decision, there are students at Morehouse College that would have never been able to go through college. If Oprah had not made that unpopular decision, $1 million gifts would have never made it to their way to the National Smithsonian. You do not know what might be on the other side of your unpopular decision. But I tell you today that there will be moments when you have to look in the mirror and say, I've prayed about it. But like Destiny's Child and Beyonce knows, I've got to do this just for me. Amen.